Okay, Dylan, so what's your favorite podcast?
Happy Prince.
Oh, what podcast is that from?
Snoriezzz.
Oh, what did you like about it?
It's where he goes like this. I hate kids. They throw rocks at me.
Nice. Okay, what's your favorite podcast, Kyle?
Paw Patrol podcast.
Oh, why do you love it?
Because Paw Patrol is my favorite.
That's awesome.
My favorite podcast is Laugh Out Loud, or this thing where it tells about Greeks and history.
Oh, Greeking Out?
Yeah, Greeking Out.
Oh, that's a good one. Awesome.
And my favorite one is Grim, Grimmer, Grimmest.
Oh, that's my favorite too. What do you love about it?
It's because it's like funny and scary, and you don't know like what's gonna happen because it's kind of fun and kind of like scary, but not too scary and funny.
Welcome to the Family Lab podcast, where we learn from each other's crazy experiments and brilliant ideas. I'm Whitney Archibald, a mom of 5, ages 9 to 19. Today's episode is the first of what I'm planning to be a monthly series, top 5 episodes on different topics each month. Today's topic is kid podcasts, and here with me to talk about kid podcasts are 2 experts in the field of kid podcasting. I'm going to have you both introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Whitney. I'm Merideth Kelly, the founder and creator of Storytopia, a kids and family podcast discovery tool. And I've been in the space for, a while now. My daughter is 12, and we started listening to podcasts together when she was 5 and started really focusing on discovery when she turns around the age of 7 during the pandemic. And we've just been, I would say, super listeners and discoverers since then.
Excellent. And Andi?
My name is Andi Smiley. I am a podcaster. I love all podcasts, but kid podcasts have a very special spot in my heart. I have my own show called The Friendly Podcast Guide, where I help moms start and grow their own podcast because I needed some help when I started mine and I didn't have it. So here I am for all of the moms that are ready to start their own.
Excellent. So today we're going to just talk about why we love podcasts, kid podcasts, and how we use them in our homes and with our families. But then we'll also go into our top 5 in different categories of kid podcasts so that you can go home with lots of recommendations of podcasts to try with your own kids. And then at the end, we'll give you some experiments that you can try at home with kid podcasts. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So let's start kind of at that strategic level. Like, why are kid podcasts great for using different ways in your home?
Yeah, I'll go first.
Yeah.
For me, I use them in a lot of different ways, but I have a lot of people that will ask me and say, like, why do you want a kid podcast rather than just a screen? And that's a valid question. I feel like the screens have their place. And one of the few places that I will never have a screen, but I will always use a kid podcast is sleep. And later you'll get to hear like my kid podcast recommendations for sleep. But I really don't want my kid laying in their bed looking at a screen. And so a kid podcast is kind of that perfect tool to help them fall asleep while keeping their mind at least a little bit busy, so that they aren't thinking about like the Lego that they're trying to build or whatever they're doing, like whatever they're reading in their book. My oldest is very much that way. And so having a kid podcast so he can close his eyes and just listen has been such a game changer. And then I'm not worried about him being on a screen for hours and hours when I'm not in there with him.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that. And I don't know, Merideth, maybe have you used this in the same way?
Yeah, well, my daughter is 12, and so we've had different phases of sleep time, right? So when she was younger, we didn't have any sound at all. We would read stories. Our bedtime routine was like, pajamas, teeth brushing, story time. And that would always consist of a book, typically. Now that she's older and she wants to kind of have autonomy at her like nighttime routine, we do let her either read or listen to a show. But typically nowadays it's like a relaxation process, right? So it's like a meditation podcast, and I have a couple of great recommendations if you don't hit them, Andy.
Perfect.
For the older crew. But yeah, that's kind of our evening routine. But we also incorporate podcasts, throughout the day as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, we've done them. Different kids have different bedtime habits for sure in my house, but especially my youngest loves to listen to podcasts, and not the funny thing and kind of a sweet thing is that he's lately been listening to all of my past episodes of podcasts, so he listens to my voice as he goes to sleep, which is so sweet, which I never expected. But those aren't necessarily podcasts that I would recommend to other, I think it's just because it's me. I don't think my podcasts are specifically good bedtime podcasts, but it is cute to me that he'll and then he'll I do one for a podcast for BYU, and he'll come talk to me the next day I heard about these two runners, let's, he'll bring that up in conversation, and it's been a cute thing. So that's been kind of a new development at my house for kid podcasts, but he loves to listen to podcasts as we go to bed. Do you guys, how do you set, do you just set a timer on when they shut off, or do you set a limit, you can listen to one, or how do you guys do that?
So we have a story button, which is like a device. It's like a kid podcast device. It looks kind of like an old timey radio, not a rodeo. And
Radio.
They have several different, you can just set it to go for an hour. You can have it turn off after the next 2 episodes. There are several different ways. So usually what I do is my 7-year-old stays up later and my 5-year-old goes to bed, but they share a room. And so they'll usually listen to a podcast or several that they both enjoy until the 5-year-old falls asleep. And then I'll go in and turn on a timer so that it will go off, because he has a really hard time falling asleep when there's still words, but he needs to relax first, kind of like what you were saying, Meredith. He just needs some time with his eyes closed. And then there's some of the sleep podcasts that I'll even recommend have just music, and so he can fall asleep to that usually. So yeah, again, there's many iterations.
Excellent.
And we use just a device that has a timer as well. I think many podcast apps have timers. So whatever you're using typically will have an option for a timer, or your screen. If you're using an iPad, even if it's connected to a smart speaker in your kid's room, has the option to have a timer just to shut off automatically. So I think there's lots of options that you can use.
Yeah, totally. So what are some other times that you use kid podcasts in your day-to-day life?
I mean, it's my number one recommendation when I have seen my kid peek out at screen time, right? So if there is, can I listen, or my screen time has expired, can you add more time? And my answer is always no, but you can listen to as many podcasts as you want.
Nice.
Or here's a book. Or have you finished your homework? Well, that's usually before the screen time. So yeah.
Totally.
Well, that's great, because it feels like a compromise. You can still have some entertainment, but it's not going to be that mindless.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of adjectives I could give to screen time, but yeah, no, I really like that. That's great. What about you, Andi?
So for me, I'm just going to name a few and then go into one of them. So car rides are a big one for us.
Yeah.
Kid podcasts make car rides so much less terrible, especially because it's 7, 5, and 3 are my kiddos' ages. And so we will sometimes, if it's a long road trip, we do bring the iPad and they'll watch some shows, but they are so ornery if we watch too much TV on a road trip. And so we try to just I'll save series of kid podcasts so that they're excited to listen to the next one, stuff like that. That usually works really well. And then the other thing is quiet time. So my kids are all pretty much out of the nap phase, but I still need time in the middle of the day to just be. And so a lot of the time I can turn on a kid podcast and say, "Hey, it's quiet time. You need to stay in your room, play with your Legos, play with your magnet tiles, whatever. Listen to this kid podcast. I'll come get you when quiet time's done." And that has really cut down on the number of times they'll come up and be like, "Hey, when is quiet time done?" And so having something that's entertaining that they can have some autonomy over, some control, has really helped make quiet time more relaxing for me, and they're more entertained, and it's less of a punishment for them. Not that it was ever a punishment, but they think it is. You know what I mean?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Well, and it kind of serves as a timer itself. It can, like, if you have a task that they need to do, or a certain amount of quiet time, you could pick a podcast that's about that, or say 2 episodes of this podcast, and then you can come talk. Like,
yes,
it's kind of
totally
nice that it has its own limit built in too.
Yeah. I love it.
I second the car ride, use of podcasts. It's a game changer. We build a playlist of podcasts that like everyone wants to listen to, and then it just makes the experience, whether you're going on an adventure and you're listening to adventure podcasts on like the way to your adventure, or just
really like that,
like anything. If you're driving to the grandparents' house or whatever, it's like there's so many. Yeah, it's like really great car entertainment, I think.
Well, and I like that it's communal, because a lot of times my problem with the ages of my kids, I have mostly teenagers. I have a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old, but like most of my kids are teenagers, and they all kind of get in their own little worlds on car trips. They want to watch different things. They're all on their own devices or playing games or different things. But if we have like a couple of podcast times, like I usually kind of let them have some of that individual time, but I also try to have a couple things. Either we watch a movie all together or we do a podcast. I prefer when we do the podcast because there's usually more discussion points, and it I don't know, it's just something fun. So yeah, when we can find a podcast that we all listen to together, then it sparks conversation, and it's like less of this everybody in your own zone kind of experience.
And that's, the main reason why I was so drawn to podcasts like in the early days was it could be a communal experience, or it could be, and I think it's starting to be more like that. Especially in the kids space where teachers are introducing podcasts in the classroom, and there's a lot more of that, like we're listening together and experiencing together. It reminded me always of like the old timey like radio shows where you would listen together, like fireside chats. And I grew up with a family who really kind of like loved that and loved the like storytelling aspect of like passed down stories from generation to generation, which is why I think I really love audio stories so much, and why I was drawn so much to podcasts, and then, eventually to kids podcasts. But yeah,
it feels like there's a legacy, and the world is just exploding. So it's crazy.
Yeah. The space has definitely exploded. I think, back in the early days, there were a handful of, really great small, now giant podcasts that were created specifically for kids. And if you do a search for kids podcasts, like the same ones come up every single time. So I think the tricky part is to kind of get out of that like rut of like, getting recommended the same podcast, because there's hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of, great podcasts that are out there that are created by not just small production companies around the globe, but like small independent creators that are doing amazing work because they love kids content.
Yeah, and this is probably a great time to talk a little bit more about Storytopia, just how you recommend those on your website, how you find new kid podcasts, all of that.
Yeah, I cheat a little bit. I get a lot of people who reach out to me on social media and say like, I'm starting a new podcast, and I'll always listen. And typically if they, look like they're going to be, creating at least a series, then I'll link that to our website. In the early days, I just started a database. And so like the whole idea of Storytopia started during the pandemic. We'd already been listening to podcasts for a couple of years, but then, we were at home and just on screens all day long. And I was like, oh, we've got to have, breaks in the day to, not be on screens.
Yeah.
So then I started sending out recommendations and lists of podcasts to friends and other parents in our classroom, like here's ways that you can take a break. And then it just evolved into this big database that turned into a website, that turned into an app that is now back to being just a website. But yeah, I mean, I get ideas from people. I get ideas from social media. I also, there's this thing that you could do with Google, like search basically the Google verse for word related things, and it'll send you an email every day or every third day with like articles or links so I have like a couple of Google searches with notifications for kids podcasts. So I get a lot of new podcasts that are like have press releases and things like that way as well. And so I'll like search and find the podcast and then add it to the list. So it's just a never ending growing list of kids podcasts. So then what I do is categorize, typically after reaching out to the creator, and put by genre. So like what's the best category? Is it a sleep or a sleepy time podcast? Is it a story? Is it an adventure? Is it a history? And then I also categorize by age. And based on what the creator's intent is, like what age range is this best suited for?
And that is a lot of work. And which is why we're so grateful that you are doing the work for us, so that then all we have to do is one click and go on your website and we can get all those categories and see what fits with our kids.
Yeah.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
Seriously. Awesome.
Well, and Andi also has a lot of episodes of the Friendly Podcast Guide, which is her podcast with kids recommending podcasts, with her recommending kids podcasts, interviewing the hosts of kid podcasts.
That's true.
So we'll include a list of some of those episodes, as well as a link to Merideth's website. It's storytopia.com.
Yes, STORITOPIA.com.
Great.
And
okay.
one of my favorite episodes of Andi's is her interviewing some of my favorite kid podcasters. So it's like full circle here.
It's great. So without further ado, let's go on to some of our recommendations. I'd love to start with you, Andi, since you already gave us a teaser for your sleep podcast, Sleepy Time podcast.
Yeah. Okay. For real. This is my bedtime hack. This is how I get my children to, if they're not going to fall asleep, they will at least listen to a podcast so that I can like have some alone time at nighttime.
Perfect.
So the first one, and this one has been the most successful for my kids. I'm starting with it first. So I don't forget, is Snoriezzz. And we'll put it in the show notes. There's 3 Z's at the end. Don't ask me why. But there they go. And this one is, they start off with a little mindfulness. They tell a story, and then they do a meditation at the end. And then there's music after that. So it's a really good for my 7-year-old. This is like his last podcast that he listens to. And he's able to just lay down, listen, close his eyes, and he's able to like walk himself through all of the things, and he knows what to expect. And he falls asleep like 80% of the time. It's fabulous.
That's amazing.
And I know, right? Oh, so good. It's so fun when you actually find something that works.
Yeah.
And one of his favorite episodes is called The Selfish Giant. I think it's episode 2 or 3. It's about a giant who like won't let little kids play on his yard, but it's really pretty. Something like that. He loves it. And that's enough. I feel like I don't think I've actually listened to the entire thing yet. I'm sure I will at some point, but the parts that I've listened to are cute. And I actually got to interview the creators for Snoriezzz, and they're delightful. So very fun. The next one, this is another favorite, is Bedtime History. Oh, I didn't even tell you. Snoriezzz, they're about 30 minutes long, but the last 10-ish minutes is just music. Just so you know. So Bedtime History is about 10 minutes long each episode. And my kid's favorite episode is called Unsinkable Sam, the Battleship Cat.
Oh.
This cat went from like 3 different ships that kept sinking, but he didn't sink. Yeah, it was a whole thing. My kids love it. They love animals in general, so like this is one of their favorites. And Brett, who is the host, does a lovely job of telling the story in a kid-friendly way, but still with all of the facts that help them learn. So it's delightful, and his voice is very soothing. So that one's a favorite.
I'm curious about this cat myself, so
I love it.
The
next one is Sleep Tight Science. This is one that doesn't always help my kids fall asleep, but they do relax with this one. I will say that, because they're so enthralled, they really want to know all of the science facts. But it's a good one. It's like a precursor almost to some of the more relaxing ones. And one of their favorite episodes is Do You Know About Dolphins? It's just packed full of facts about dolphins, and they love it. And those are usually, the earlier ones are a little bit shorter, like 10, 15 minutes. These later ones are more like 20, 25, depending on the episode, just so you know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
And then Story Train these again are shorter. I think they're like 6 minutes. And these are for a younger crowd for sure. Like my 7-year-old, I will turn these on if he will not fall asleep. I'm like, honey, you're just going to be bored, and you're going to fall asleep because you're bored. and it works, again, probably like 50% of the time. But these are definitely for a younger audience. My 5 and 3-year-old really like them. They're just sweet, sweet stories that just relax you into sleep in a glorious way. My kids really like the No Dancing at the Dinner Table episode.
Oh, that's cute.
It's a classic in our house, at least.
Nice.
And then the last one is technically not a kid podcast, but it's so good for helping kids sleep. And honestly, I use it to help me sleep too when I can't sleep. It's called Nothing Much Happens. It's just absolutely delightful. I personally, like, my son has a hard time sleeping because he gets it from me. I have a hard time sleeping. So this is one that I can turn on, especially if we're like on a trip and we're all in the same room. I can turn this one on and help us all fall asleep. Because like I feel like the little kids ones don't really work as well for me. But this one will work for me every time, and will work for the kids pretty much every time. It's just like kind of a meandering story. These are about 30 minutes too, that just help you fall asleep. It's
like
glorious.
boring on purpose.
Yeah. But in like a delightful, cozy way, all at the same time. I just love them. Like I will talk about Nothing Much Happens probably for the rest of my life. I love it so much.
Oh, not at the top of my list right now.
I know, it really does help.
Yeah, and I haven't listened to it yet, but I did listen to your episode about it. So I need to.
I did get.
Listen.
Yeah, I interviewed Catherine, and she is just the most delightful human. She's so selfless, and she is just so good at what she does, and her voice is so soothing. In the interview, she uses her same voice, like, oh, this is the best. So yes, I love it.
Awesome. Well, those are some great recommendations.
Thank you.
Oh, I love that. Great. Okay. Shall we move to yours, Meredith?
Sure. Yes. I had a really hard time narrowing down a genre or a specific topic.
So hard.
I was thinking like my all-time favorites, but also it's like my like a grouping of my favorites along with ones that I think are really well done, but maybe underrepresented.
Cool.
So, like I said before, like when you search for podcasts for kids, you get a lot of the either most established, well listened to podcasts. And then it's hard to find kind of like the really good ones that are out there, but maybe don't get as much love. So these are, I would say, ones that I would like to give some love to.
Oh, great.
I love it.
Discovery.
Yeah. So one is called Armchair Adventures. It's a show done out of the UK by this group called Made for Mortals. It's like a theater group and then this particular podcast was created during the pandemic by one of their theater groups for over 60s. So they have this kind of like older person's theater group. And when they stopped being able to meet in person because of the pandemic, they went virtual and they came up with this idea of creating this podcast, and they named it Armchair Adventures. And like all of the voices, except for the main character and Uncle Chris, which is one of the creators, they're all like over 60s, like retirees that get in a room and like do voiceovers, and they go on adventures. So the podcast like main character is the daughter of someone who runs a travel agency. And so during the pandemic, the travel agency like shut down, and they had to come up with ideas of how to like send people on adventures without being able to travel. And so these are all like armchair virtual adventures.
Oh, that is so charming.
That's really cute.
It's really
I love
cute.
that.
And so they're like sometimes longer episodes, one that came out this year, and it's a 2-part. So the first part is, like the first half. I think they're like probably in total maybe like 50 minutes long. So it's like the first 25 and then the second 25 minutes. It's called The Shakespeare Adventure. And so, they get into full like, British Shakespeare like adventure, talking about the history and plays and, whatnot. Anyway, so sometimes they go back in time. Sometimes they just take you to where they're going. But it's really, really fun. And it's so charming to listen to like all these older people participate, because I can hear when I listen that they're just like beyond delighted to be a part of this program.
Oh, I can't wait to listen. That's so fun.
The second one on my list is Reading Bug Adventures. So this is, gosh, I think they've been around since even before the pandemic, but the Reading Bug podcast is a spinoff of a bookstore in Northern California called The Reading Bug. And it's like a small family-owned business. And because they love children's literature, they were like, oh, we want to, basically create a way to talk about books, but also to promote like the Reading Bug, like bookstore.
Yeah.
So they created this podcast. It's like incredibly well produced for like a small independent bookstore. And they go on adventures around the world. And all of the adventures and each episode basically reference multiple books that they research the episode with, like from within their bookstore.
Oh, cool.
So in the show notes, they talk about all the books and then all of the things that they reference. The one that I love the most is called Inner Space. And they basically go on. So the Reading Bug and, I forget the name of the main character. The Reading Bug and the main character go on an adventure together, and they pack a backpack, right, with like their books. And this, the one that like always stood out to me is called Inner Space. They go into the human body.
Oh,
and like travel through the human body to like talk about all the things that they're experiencing.
Like Magic School Bus style, huh?
Exactly. 100% Magic School Bus meets like the local bookstore.
That's cute.
So cute. And they do like original music, and all their audio production is really, really great. And I don't know, it's like maybe one of the first ones I listened to with Anna, my daughter.
Oh,
Probably why it sticks out to me is like being a favorite. The Reading Bug bookstore also does like a kids book subscription that's really cool. So we can put their website on the show notes as well. Like you can sign up, and based on your kid's age and their interests, they'll send you books on like a quarterly basis that they recommend for your kid, we subscribed to that for a while, which was really cool.
Oh, that's fun to have like a tangible thing to go along with the podcast. That's really fun.
Totally. Third is Culture Kids, which Andi, I know you know.
I do love them.
Yeah. Kristen and her son Asher, who I think is now probably 7 or 8, but he was young when they started the show a few years ago. Culture Kids is a podcast, mom and son podcast, just about different cultures and foods. And they do things like, these are just some examples of some of the episodes they've done, just so you can, get a picture, like talking about Hindu weddings, taste of kimbap, embracing Ramadan, rhythms of West African drums. They basically like find things that are like uniquely culturally identified and like dive into them. And I think it's like a passion project, labor of love. Kristen grew up Korean American and just like really feels compelled to share like differences in cultural identity with people, especially kids, so that it can feel less other, like everyone can feel a little less othered.
Yeah,
And
that's
as,
really sweet.
kids learn, they can experience through listening to these stories, which I think is super, super cool.
And how fun to have a mother-son duo. That's
It's
cute.
so cute. They're super cute.
That's
They
awesome.
are so cute.
You can't duplicate that kind of relationship and chemistry as
Yeah, it's fun. And so the next on my list is a show which I thought you might talk about for sleep time, Andi, but it's called The Story Forest. And I feel
I don't think
like
I've heard of that
maybe,
one.
what? Oh my gosh, you have to
No,
put this on your kids' bedtime list.
I'm
So
totally putting it on it right
Brave
now.
Forest are original stories written by this woman, also British, Anna Roberts, and they're read by her mom, Pam McNaughton. So her mom is, I don't even know ages, but like, let's just say Anna's my age and her mom's, my mom's age. They're so sweet. So they work together and they write these series. So each season is a series and they have, I think, 10 now. So like some of the series are like Javan and the Dragon. And the one I really like that we first listened to back in 2021 was called Dashaway Detectives. And so there are all these characters and the mom is like the single narrator voice. But she has just such a lovely voice, and the stories are really well written and just very, very well done. For kids that really like narrative fiction stories, it's just like a great sleeper pick that people maybe haven't heard of that are really great. There's lots of options like monsters, detectives, castles, dragons, like all sorts of stuff.
Well, and I just love that vibe of like the homemade stories that continue. Like my dad does that whenever all the cousins get together. It's like the Singly Cousin Adventures, and he like builds on the stories, and all the kids are the characters in it. But there's just something about those like made up, invented stories that are kind of serial that are so fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Totally.
And the last one on my list, which is kind of it's an interesting one for kids. I mean, it's obviously meant for kids, but I recommend this one a ton to elementary school teachers, specifically 4th and 5th grade, like teachers that are touching on science. It's called Solve It for Kids. And it was also a COVID passion project by the author, so kid science author, Jennifer Swanson. Her co-host is Jeff Gagne, who does like science education, I think for the Air Force Academy. You might want to, I'll confirm. But anyway, the hosts are, every single time I listen to this show, I get so excited about science. I was like a journalism major, so I'm like,
that's saying something.
That's saying something a lot. They are so energetic and energizing when it comes to like the topics they talk about, and they basically pick based on their interests. So they'll do like underwater science, they'll do space, they'll do whatever it is. Like they'll have an interesting topic or like a topic that is, pop culture right now, whatever. They'll find their interviewees and they basically spend whatever 20 to 40 minutes on an episode just asking questions of whoever the expert is. And they deep dive into things. But also one of the things that's super cool, which is why I recommend it to teachers, is they have tons of resource materials on their website that go with each episode. So like the episode that that jumps out in my head was, I think they did a couple years ago, like, how do you study manatees? And they talked to this woman who runs like an educational like site where they're like counting and doing research on sort of like manatees in Florida and kind of in that area. And they basically have an assignment for listeners. Like when you're done, go to this website and then go to the manatee cam and count as many manatees as you can. And then like submit that, through the website. And then basically you can be a scientist, like doing this research.
That's awesome.
So it's like super hands-on, like super tangible stuff that they're teaching, like all really fun. Like when they talk about a subject, they are just so excited that you're like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting.
Oh, that's so fun.
It is fun. So I don't know if all kids get like that jazzed or if I just like learning things and that's why I love it. But I think their energy and the topics that they cover are super fun. So it's another one of those, like there's lots of kids science podcasts, but this is just one where I think not very many people know about it. And I think it's great.
Well, and that is a perfect segue into my list because I decided to kind of zero in on the kid podcasts that are also fun for adults to listen to. And it sounds like that one exactly fits the bill. So I'm going to go right out and listen to that after I'm done. But so my kids are super snobby about podcasts, like especially if they think they're being talked down to, like no patronizing or condescending podcasts for them. Like they don't like funny voices. Like even from a really young age, my kids have really like, they'll tolerate some voices in the narrations, but if it's like adults trying to sound like kids or things like that, they're like really picky about it. So, which can be good for me too, because some of those are really annoying to adults too. And some podcasts do it well. So I don't want to like disparage any podcasts that are, because some of those narrative podcasts with the different voice acting, some are done very well. Yeah. But my kids see right through the ones that are done poorly or cheaply or, or condescendingly. So,
right.
So I made a list of the top 5 that we like to listen to, on car rides together, like in some of those communal listening spaces. So all 5 are great, but this one was just overwhelmingly number 1 with all my kids is Grim Grimmer Grimmest. And we love this podcast, and I love listening to it too. Adam Gidwitz is a genius, and he's a great writer. He's really good at that like interactive read aloud vibe where he tells the story and then he's like actually telling it to a classroom of kids, and he'll be like asking them really engaging questions, like getting past those yes or no questions and being like, what do you think's going to happen next? Why would he do that? Or, things like that. And captures really cute footage of the kids reacting. But he just tells kind of some of the more gruesome, grim fairy tales. And he gives you a warning, like, this is grimmest. You may want to pause and reconsider your life choices, So we love that. And the storytelling is great. The stories themselves, obviously classics, but he tells them with such flair, and the kids are great. Anyway, we just love that one. And yeah, all ages can enjoy that one. The other one we discovered on a road trip. I was actually doing, I called it Kid Podcast Madness, like four years ago or something. And I had like brackets set up, and I would have kid podcasts competing against each other, and my kids got to choose between them. And then we had a runner. That's where Grim Grimmer Grimmest won, not the number 1 spot. But this was one that was right up there in the runoff on that bracket, and it was Whose Amazing Life, and we ended up just listening to episode after episode. We probably listened to like 6 episodes in a row, which is kind of a record for my kids all listening to the same thing on a road trip.
The one where they describe the person and then you have to figure out who it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's like Olympians, there's historical figures, there's all these different people, and they just kind of chronicle through their life. But it's very well written, great stories. They pick engaging people, and I just realized that my youngest was pretty young when we listened to so many of those. So I just reintroduced it to him, and he is asking for it nonstop. He's just devouring all the episodes one after another. So it's getting him to clean his room lately this week. It was quite a project, the room. So that's a great one. One that we listened to on the way to school every day for at least a year, probably 2 years. Anyway, every morning we would listen to Kid News on the way to school. It's like, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes. It varies a little bit, but they just give a really quick briefing of some of the news that's kid friendly, pretty non-biased, I think. And then they have a quiz at the end. And so my kids would engage and we'd do the quiz. They're good at pulling really interesting tidbits, and especially like some of the stories about kids, which is really fun for the kids. So it was a nice kind of ritual to start our day and start some conversation. It was just the right amount of time for our drive to school, and it became like, this fun thing they looked forward to. This one is probably obvious. A lot of people have heard this one, but Circle Round is just such a classic. It is so good. Beautifully really told by professional storytellers. Yeah. Also well written. Just classic story tales from around the world. Did I say story tales? That's not a word. Classic stories and fairy tales from around the world, and just really, really well done. They hire like professional actors. Some you even know and recognize. I don't know how they get such talent, but they're really good. They're really cozy, great stories. And the last one is one of the only like voice acting ones that we all agreed on. Was 6 minutes. It's there's a lot that happens in that, but it's kind of like a sci-fi story that goes on for a couple seasons, and every episode is just 6 minutes and leaves with a big cliffhanger. And so it's a good one for like again, for road trips or something like that, or if you need a timer, you're like, okay, I want you to clean your room for 6 minutes and you can listen to this podcast as you do it. So I don't know, it was every one of my kids has gotten hooked on that in some different stages, because they
Totally
could understand it.
It's like an audio drama, right? Like that kind of way to describe it. It's it's like an old timey. It obviously doesn't sound old timey, but it's like intense and exciting. Yeah, it's like a movie, but just a podcast instead.
Yeah,
so that's
actors
by Gen Z Media, and they have for your listeners out there that are unfamiliar with the kids landscape, they have so many similar types of shows. Maybe different topics or different genre, but like the audio drama is like built deeply into a lot of their shows. There was one, I think recently, The Nightingale, that my daughter got super hooked on. So she was into 6 minutes early on, like pandemic time, and listened to it again and again and again and again. But like they have a few newer shows that are just as great, fun audio dramas. They do a really good job with shows.
That is so great. So my next list is kind of, I kind of cheated because I only told everybody else they could pick 5, and then I have a second list. But it's because I decided to do the reverse. Whereas those were kid podcasts that appeal to adults, I just picked 3 adult podcasts that appeal to kids that we listen to together. So the first one that we ever did that way is Radiolab, and that's been around forever, and I feel like everybody knows Radiolab, but it is just so good, so good and so beloved. And it's almost always, I if there's an exception, I don't know, but it's usually kid friendly, like content wise. And if not, they would for sure give an advisory at the beginning, if it was an adult topic.
They title it like appropriately, so you can sense if it's a topic you want to share with your family or not.
Totally. And there are some that stand out, like from way back when. There's one about color, which I have listened to probably like 10 times, with different kids and different people that I want to introduce to cool podcasts. I just love that one. The things they do with sound to show color. I mean, it's just
amazing.
Masterclass on podcasting. But it's also super fascinating for kids and adults, everyone. There's one about parasites that will gross you out and disturb you in all the most delightful ways. But they also have done their own selections and made a separate feed called Radiolab Kids, where they picked some of their favorite kid-friendly or just things that would be interesting to kids, because they're not all going to be interesting to kids. Some of them are a little too deep or too scientific or whatever. But these ones, they've hand selected some of their episodes, and then they also created their own podcast for kids called Terrestrials.
I was going to mention that if you didn't.
So
they've done such a good job,
and these Radiolab is basically known as the production standard for all podcasts. Like the sound is amazing, and they're just so well produced. So. Yeah. Really cool, but really fun to generate conversation with your kids about. It's not all science. Sometimes it's, sociology, anthropology. It's all sorts of interesting topics. So that's one of the first ones that I ever listened, adult podcasts that I listened to with my children.
Yeah.
Another one that is not meant for children, but that is very beloved by everyone in my family is Everything is Alive. by
Oh.
Ian Chillag. Are you familiar with that one?
I haven't.
This is kind of zany and bizarre, and that's what I love about it. So Ian Chillag interviews inanimate objects. And yes, it's amazing. And
Do the
so
inanimate objects respond?
yes, because they hire comedians to be the inanimate objects.
Amazing.
And they are amazing. So like everything from a sock, a can of soda, there's, two of my favorites that I just re-listened to today because I love them so much. I think my all-time favorite is Maeve Lamppost. It's like, how can an interview with a lamppost make you like emotional and sentimental? I don't know, but she like did such a good job. Like she was the lamppost, and you just feel for this lamppost and all her desires to become a screen actor, a lamppost on movies and television. It's amazing.
Gosh,
she has a special kinship with the lamp on Singing in the Rain. I mean, it's just amazing.
Oh, wow.
It's amazing. And then there's one, like maybe one of the first ones to start listening to with your kids is called Alligator. It's just alligator, alligator, but it's a stuffed alligator talking about, among other things, what it would be like to actually go live in a swamp with real alligators. And it's just so cute. And that's Tom Bodett doing that voice. Anyway,
great.
It's so good. It's so good. So yeah, that's one of our favorites, and that's going to be what my experiment is based on at the end of the episode. But another one was Vinny the Vending Machine. Like they're just so good, so good.
Wonderful.
So that's a really fun and funny thing, but also sometimes endearing and touching.
Right.
Oddly. And they did another season. They did a couple seasons of inanimate objects, and then they did another season of animals, which was also interesting, but I think it just wasn't quite as weird as the inanimate objects. And I love that weird factor. Yeah. So it was, anyway, they're all worth listening to. Most of them are kid friendly, but I feel like they also give a warning. The last one is actually a podcaster that Andi and I met at a conference, but we had been longtime fans. 20,000 Hertz is the podcast, and Dallas Taylor's the host.
Yeah.
He's a sound engineer. It's beautifully produced also, obviously.
Really well done. Yeah.
Yeah, so good. But he makes a point to make them kid-friendly because he has young kids and he wants them to be able to listen to his podcast. Maybe they listen to his podcast to fall asleep, probably. Right. I don't know.
I mean, there are now that I have a 12-year-old, and you probably say this about your kids, like there's an interest in creating stories for this age group, you know? And that's a great one to listen to if you're like, if you are a young person and you're interested in creating content.
Absolutely.
Like it's always good to get ideas of how it all works.
Yeah. And then they just touch on interesting topics. So there's 3 episodes that kind of stood out as things that are episodes that are fun that I've listened to with my kids. One was very recent episode, The Voices of Bluey. So they go behind the sound design of Bluey, and it's so fascinating and charming. It's so good. It just talks about how they created it. Anyways, it's how and why. Then there was a hilarious, amazing one about nursery rhymes and some of the origins of some of the nursery rhymes. And he even goes into some of the like little songs he's made up for his kids. And it's just really, really cute, but also really fun. And some of the disturbing history. They kind of break down some of the myths behind some of the nursery rhymes too. And some of them may or may not be as disturbing as you think. Anyway, so it's really fun. And then they did, the first one that I had my kids listen to was one about sound-alikes, and they had Tom Hanks's brother, who does some of his voices, talk about what it's like to
sound like him,
sound like his brother, and do his voice. And that my favorite tidbit from that is that he has to sometimes pretend to do Woody's voice. He has to pretend like he's his brother Tom yelling at when he yells at his kid. Like it's just these little insider information. So
So fun.
super fun. So that's my third adult podcast that appeals to kids as well. And those have been hits with my family. So we've covered a lot of ground, covered a lot of podcasts. We have so much listening to do. But I would love to go into some experiments that we can try with our kids with some of these podcasts or other podcasts. So we will start with Andi.
Okay. Okay, so my experiment is really straightforward. It's mostly just to try a kid podcast that helps your kids sleep. But here's kind of how you can do it so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. And I can't take full credit for this. A lady on TikTok, when I was talking about kid podcast, gave me this idea, and I cannot remember her name, and I cannot find the comment. So I apologize, but it wasn't all me. She says what she does with her kids is she will listen to one episode with her kids staying in the room, and then she'll have another one play, but she will leave the room, and it helps with like bedtime separation anxiety. Because there's still voices. It's still similar to when mom was in the room, but now she's not. But there's still the podcast playing, so it's not too scary, and it'll be okay. And so that's one way that you can do it, especially as you're trying to introduce kid podcasts into like your sleep routine. That's an easy way to bring it in without it feeling overwhelming for your littles. And honestly, eventually your kids probably won't need you in there during the first episode anymore, but for that transition of them being like, what is this thing? What are we doing? That can help with that transition into using kid podcasts for sleep.
Yeah, and turning it into a ritual. I love that. That's a really great piece of advice. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Andi. And now, Merideth, what experiment do you have for us?
So I think this one is pretty simple. And for at least my family, the thing that we struggle with is like balancing screen time with other activities. And so one of the things that we have on our refrigerator, in addition to like the checklist of things that you need to do before you start entertainment, we have like, books to read or like, like lists of things to do if you say you're bored, right? And so obviously one of those things are books, right? Drawing, doing arts and crafts and things like that. But we always put podcasts. And so an experiment you can do if you don't already have lists like this is, if you're encouraging your kids who are already readers to do something in addition to, reading as non-screen time, you can put, listen to an hour of podcasts per week, right? Instead of like reading for 30 minutes a night, or in addition to reading 30 minutes a night, you can say, 15 minutes of podcasts a day or something like that, so that you're spending more time in sort of the world of audio and reading versus screen time. So we like to strike a balance. And so we just have those lists on our refrigerator, and that becomes really helpful because they're just checklists. Did I listen to however many minutes a day, or did I read how many minutes a day? And so that helps us see like where there's a balance in the entertainment in our house.
Yeah, well, and right next to that list, you could have a list of some of these recommended podcasts that we've been talking about today. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah.
My daughter,
what a great tip.
Yeah, my daughter just got her own email address. So during the day, sometimes I'll send her a little email. When you get home from school, listen to this podcast and tell me what you think of it.
Oh, that's so great. That's a great way to start a conversation.
Yeah.
That's kind of experiment number 3, isn't it? Yeah. I love that. Great. Okay, well, this is either experiment number 3 or experiment number 4, depending on how you want to look at it. But my experiment is to specifically choose an episode of Everything is Alive to listen to with your kids. But before you listen to the episode, we've done this a couple times, and it makes the experience so much more fun. We choose that item. The first time we did it, it was Roomba. There's an episode about a Roomba, and I made it kind of an experiment in empathy. So we talked about, what do you think it would be like to be a Roomba? What would make you happy? What would make you sad? What would you get sick of? What would annoy you? What would be fun for you as a Roomba? And we just like explored that scenario of becoming a Roomba, and you could do it with any of the episodes. And then you get to listen to somebody pretending to be a Roomba and see if they had some of the same ideas that you had, or pause it and be like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Like, what do you think of this? And at the end, talk about, wow, like, is that what you expected? Or what did that make you think of? And, just keep continuing the conversation. So that's my experiment.
That's a really good one. And you could do it, if you're doing car listening, right?
Yeah.
We do this a lot, or have done this a lot, where we stop in the middle of something and then just talk about what that feels like, or, so that's, I think, especially if you're co-listening, it's a really good opportunity to talk about the things that you're listening to with your kids, which I love that. I love that experiment a lot.
Yeah, well, and it's this weird twist on empathy that then can get them thinking about, like, you can have that conversation. Well, yeah, and what do you think it's like to be this person at your school? Like, just to get them to step outside of their own feelings, but to do it at a very neutral, kind of strange and silly way. Yeah. So anyway, well, those are our experiments that you can try at home. Pick one that works with your family. It has been such a pleasure to be with you, Merideth. We so enjoy your expertise of all the kid podcasts you've explored, and we're grateful for the work that you've done for us, so we don't have to do so much Googling.
Happy to help. I love it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Andi, so much.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, thank you. This has been so delightful.